Lawyers of Reddit. What made you think, no way I can defend this? Story 1. A woman wanted me to sue her previous lawyer for charging her a lot of money, but producing almost no work to justify his fees. She gave me what she told me was the lawyer's total work product, a page printed of the internet, for which she said she was charged thousands of dollars for legal advice. She had already brought a claim via my jurisdiction's disciplinary body for lawyers she had lost and wanted to bring an appeal. The judgment kept referring to documents that I hadn't seen. I pushed her to give me everything, and she came in with multiple files full of immaculate legal work that totally justified the fees she was fighting. We told her to get lost, but she wasted a lot of my time before we realized she was full of crap. Comment 1. No. I suppose we could have, but we were ultimately refusing to take her case or carry out her instructions, so we thought it best to just get rid of her. Also, she was unhinged, more so than my account above sets out. She was paranoid and possibly mildly delusional. Charging her for the work would have perhaps been cruel. Comment 2. Depends what you mean by business side. I hate anything to do with marketing attracting clients. I enjoy the non-court work that actually relates to my litigation files. I wouldn't want to be in court all the time. The preparation for civil litigation trials is exhausting. Comment 3. Depends what you mean by business side. I hate anything to do with marketing attracting clients. I enjoy the non-court work that actually relates to my litigation files. I wouldn't want to be in court all the time. The preparation for civil litigation trials is exhausting. Comment 4. A friend of mine was in a case where a guy was accused of graffiti vandalism, among other things, and the conversation with the judge went like this. Judge, sir, did you make this graffiti? Defendant. No, I did not. J. But it has your signature at the end. D. Yes. An artist has to sign his work. Case closed. Story 2. So this guy ordered a pizza. Nowhere was it specified that the delivery was supposed to be done under 30 minutes, but the guy assumed it because movies. The delivery arrived 1 hour later, and to apologize, even if it wasn't necessary, they brought him his order and an additional beef pizza. The guy wanted our firm to sue them because he is Hindu, doesn't eat beef, and apparently felt offended. Also, this one time this dude wanted us to sue his neighbor because he assumed the guy was practicing black magic. Story 3. A lady was sacked by a large company. They had caught her taking money to fund a gambling habit. They had clear evidence the money had been taken, and she did not deny it. She sued the company for $300,000 for unfair dismissal. My sister's firm represented the company against this woman. The case was so easy. The firm gave it to my sister as her first ever solo attempt. My sister screwed it up badly. Not only did she lose, the court awarded the woman $500,000 instead of the $300,000 she asked for. In the end, it was a good career move. The partners all knew her name and dropped into her office, one by one, to offer their sympathy. Comment 1. What did she do? I mean, if there's evidence and a confession, what the heck? Narrator. Seems kinda messed up that making a mistake in proceedings would affect the judgment so much. Whenever I read Reddit comments about law, it seems like judges are all petty jerks with no regard for actual justice. Comment to have you served on a jury. I had my first experience last month and it was truly disappointing, and I would argue life changing. I no longer see the average grown adult with the same respect as I did before due to those deliberations. And honestly, my impression of the jurors prior to deliberations were that they seemed engaged, fairly intelligent, and they really were a cross-section of the general public. But as soon as deliberations began, I was truly astonished at their utter inability to follow the instructions, which were actually fabulously written. The judge was great throughout the trial, but those instructions were fantastic, and to keep their personal biases out of the case. And I can sense how that experience has seeped into my psyche and is polluting my ability to trust people. And I have become more suspicious of the true motivations of those around me. I literally cannot tell if I was just naive before and am more realistic now, or if I was realistic before and have become cynical now. That's not to say that the attorney didn't have a role in the loss, but I just see the jury as a deeply flawed but necessary evil. I may even discuss it with my therapist. Lol. I really am a changed man. Comment 3. You and I have similar experiences with being a part of a jury. My case was open shut, clear cut with no ambiguity. The evidence was overwhelming, and yet several of the jurors kept saying things like, I know he did it, but I just feel bad for him. Or, But did they really prove it beyond all doubt? It's not about proving it 100%. It's about proving it beyond reasonable doubt. And it's not about proving the person deserves the punishment. It's about deciding if the person committed the accused crime. It's so frustrating trying to work with people who inject their politics or ethics into a straightforward case. Edit. I keep seeing jury nullification brought up. This wasn't one you all would want nullified. It was a group of young males, but my jury was only for one of the 4 accused of kidnapping a woman and coercing her to be with them physically with a gun. The only thing the police couldn't prove when they briefly investigated it was the part about using the gun. 2 of the other boys delivered matching confessions. Witnesses agreed they'd seen the boys acting suspiciously with her. A store clerk testified she'd left a note with him when they sent her in to buy beer for them. This was an easy case to decide. Easy. And it took 3 days to deliberate. The judge was very annoyed. Comment 4. What surprises me is people's faith in juries. Have you met people before? Most are completely biased and led by their emotions, and trying to direct a group of them is like herding cats. Why does anyone think people will suddenly change because it's a jury and they're told to be impartial? Comment 5. I was in a car accident when I was 16. It was totally my fault. It was summer, and it had rained for the first time in a while, so the streets were really slippery. I was going around a 90-degree curve and slid slightly over the center line because I hit my brakes. I was going somewhere between 15–20 mph. I hit the front or side of the oncoming car with the front or side of my car. There was very little damage done to either vehicle, and the police did not ticket me. She sued. First, she tried to sue my parents since my insurance was on their policy, but that got thrown out. Then she sued me. My insurance company provided. My lawyer, who was a very detailed, thorough guy as far as I could tell. They tried several times to settle with her, but she refused. By the time this went to court, I had just turned 18. I literally had to sit at the defendant's table all day. I kid you not. The woman I hit claimed she was injured in the accident and could no longer feel her pinky toe. Her lawyer showed up late, looking like Chris Farley when he slept in a van down by the river. His suit jacket looked like it had been wadded up somewhere. This woman went to all the doctors she could, and every doctor's notes presented by her said she claims she can't feel her pinky toe, but testing shows no issues. She claimed emotional duress because she could only wear sneakers because of her injury. She limped around in the courthouse, but I happened to see her out the window during the lunch break, and she literally sprinted to her car while I sat at the defendant's table on trial all day. I saw several jurors sleeping and the foreman using a rolled-up piece of paper like a telescope to look around the courtroom while someone was testifying. The judge instructed the jury to not take insurance into account. That is, they were not allowed to know if I had insurance and were not allowed to assume I did. They just looked at me, a scared 18-year-old, and decided that this woman's pinky toe claim was worth $250,000. Her lawyer was shocked. That was the day I completely lost faith in our justice system. Edit. I was just reminded by my grandma that she actually sued for $100,000 and the jury awarded her $250,000. This lawsuit was solely for pain and suffering, as my insurance had already paid out for her medical bills and to repair the scratch on her car. Her only complaint was that she could no longer feel her right pinky toe due to the accident, nothing else. She said not feeling her right pinky toe prevented her from walking normally and wearing high heels. Her lawyer brought all of her doctor notes into evidence, and they literally all ended with, "We could find nothing wrong with her." Edit 2. Just remembered this beautiful detail. The case went to court the summer after I graduated high school. The county courthouse was in the town adjacent to mine, and both towns were small, though they were the biggest ones in the county. The trial began with jury selection, and I had to sit there while they asked anyone who knew me in any way to dismiss themselves. I was a cheerleader, and it was a small town, so at least half the people left because they had seen me around or just knew who I was. This was in the late 90s, so my home phone was blown up by people I knew calling to ask why their mom or dad or sister or uncle or cousin saw me on trial. The answering machine was completely full by the time I got home. There were a few who thought it was a serious crime case, no idea who I supposedly harmed, so that was fun. Story 4. Not my client, but my dad and the hospital he worked at was sued by a gentleman after he saved his wife's life. Details. Patient is pregnant with 8th child and miscarries. The fetus is removed, but the patient starts bleeding uncontrollably. The only option available is a hysterectomy. It was either that, or she dies right there on the table. My dad gets called in to do the surgery, performs it successfully, hooray. The patient's husband is quite devout and beyond upset that his wife can't have any more kids. So he sued the hospital. No firm would represent him, and he ended up bringing proceedings himself. Went all the way to trial, and he lost hard. Edit. It was the 6th pregnancy, my bad. This event happened 20 years ago, so my memory of the details was a bit off. I have added more info in the comments below, for anyone who is interested. Comment forget. Religion. How anyone could be so focused on she can't have any more kids than on the fact their wife is still alive thanks to your dad is beyond me. I'm glad he lost, but the poor wife having to deal with a man like that who just sees her as the baby maker. Story 5. Probably my client charged with statutory assault, multiple counts, who impregnated his high school sweetheart's daughter after being with said daughter from the ages of 13–15. He was 35 at the time of the birth. DNA in the form of a baby is strong evidence for the state. Comment 1. Not a lawyer, but I've worked with legal defense teams. I deal with it by reminding myself that I'm not supporting this abhorrent behavior, but that I am protecting their right to a fair trial. Comment 2. Yeah. As soon as we start saying this person here and that person there don't deserve robust defenses because they're so terrible, we're basically saying trial by jury shouldn't happen, and we should just ask a judge to gut check the cops, which is close enough to what's happening, so let's not move further down that path. Comment 3. In the past, when someone would ask me about defending someone so abhorrent, I would make the analogy that you wouldn't expect a doctor to deny treatment of someone in the emergency room just because they are a criminal, would you? But I stopped using that analogy because a lot of people that question due process also question a doctor providing medical care to criminals. Comment for Omchi. I know a family this is deeply upsetting, but here it is. The mother had 6 children. Her partner engaged in highly inappropriate behavior toward 4 of the daughters. The second oldest became pregnant and eventually married him. They went on to have 4 children together, 3 of whom were girls. Later, serious concerns arose regarding his behavior with those children as well, and 2 of the older girls became pregnant. The oldest was 18, so authorities couldn't compel a DNA test, but the younger one was 16 or 17, and the test confirmed his paternity. Last I heard, he was incarcerated, but that was about 5 years ago. Edit. Since this is getting attention, I've removed any identifying details. Those girls have already endured enough. Story 6. My dad had a client who was on trial for being a felon in possession of firearms, possession of stolen property, burglary, and distribution of narcotics. Guy had multiple pictures of himself on Facebook holding firearms, money, and substances, and had videos of himself both breaking into someone's house and taking a weapon as well as selling illegal substances on several occasions. Despite my dad basically telling the guy he was going to prison either way and to plead out for a reduced sentence, he still pleaded not guilty. We still occasionally joke that the guy clearly wasn't competent to stand trial by virtue of being so oblivious. Comment 1. Validation. They want people to look at them and think, wow, he's so cool. He's above the system. The cops can't stop him. And since cops aren't on his friends list, there is no way that they would be able to trace his illegal actions through the internet. Story 7. Not a lawyer, but I feel bad for YNW Mellis lawyer, Jude. Wrote 3 songs about ending someone's life. 2 people were seriously harmed in his vehicle. He drove them to the hospital and said it was a drive-by. The shell casings were in his car. Cell phone GPS placed him at the scene. He had texted threats and still pleaded not guilty. Comment 1. I imagine that if you take a job like that, you probably have to disconnect emotionally and just play the part, as if it were a speech and debate exercise. Then, after your client of course loses, you go cash your paycheck. Comment. I've heard lawyers describe it as not defending the person, but ensuring the prosecutors are following the law and doing their part to ensure the justice system works the way it's supposed to. Comment 3. Which is fair. There are a lot of protections built into the law for many reasons, and even if your client is awful, and let's face it, a lot of them will not be diamonds in the rough, they're entitled to their legal right to a competent defense and for prosecutors and police not to take shortcuts that compromise the case. Comment for law student here. This is exactly what's happening. I often get asked if I won't have a problem defending people accused of serious crimes. Nope. They will get their punishment. Unless they didn't do it, then it's my job to make sure they don't get punished instead of the real guilty person. Defending someone in a criminal case is just making sure that the prosecution doesn't illegally screw them over. The very essence of a criminal defender's work is that even the worst people are still human beings. They still have certain rights that we as a civilization can't just dismiss, and it's the defender's job to make sure that they get the correct punishment. Not more, not less. Story 8. I represented a tree trimming company that went to the wrong address and cut down all the mature trees in that yard. The right address was 100 North 30th Street, and the company went to 100 South 30th Street and just went straight at it, hacking away. I still have no idea why the insurance company didn't just settle that one pursuit. Story 9 worked in-house for a famous character company with a large fan base. A few unusual callers a year. A guy called claiming that we stole characters he created and demanded compensation. I calmly asked for more details so I could determine whether there was any merit to it. He stated he designed the characters and gave them to the well-known creator when he was a kid, and the person passed them off as their own. I asked when he was born, and it turned out he was born a good 20 years after the characters were originally created. When I asked him to explain this, he shifted and claimed he also created other well-known characters and brands which weren't even owned by our company. I kindly asked him to send something in writing if he wanted to pursue anything, and hung up. I figured if he wasn't going to do some really basic research on his own claim, he wasn't going to spend time writing it up. Never heard from him again. Not a lawyer. I was a jailer and used to pull double duty as a bailiff. A guy stole a pickup truck and was later captured, passed out behind the wheel, parked on a sidewalk, surrounded by a ridiculous amount of illegal substances and firearms. His legal defense? He elected to represent himself because he wasn't done making poor choices. Double jeopardy. You can't charge me for theft, illegal substances, and possession of weapons because I've already been convicted of all those charges before. In short, during his jury trial, he admitted to doing it, but explained with a smirk grin that since he had already done time for the same types of charges from another case before, he believed he couldn't be prosecuted again. This is not how double jeopardy works, folks. He's in prison for 20 years now. If he'd taken legal counsel, he could easily cut a deal for 5. Story 10. Not a lawyer. I was a jailer and used to pull double duty as a bailiff. A guy stole a pickup truck and was later captured, passed out behind the wheel, parked on a sidewalk, surrounded by a ridiculous amount of illegal substances and firearms. His legal defense? He elected to represent himself because he wasn't done making poor choices. Double jeopardy. You can't charge me for theft, illegal substances, and possession of weapons because I've already been convicted of all those charges before. In short, during his jury trial, he admitted to doing it, but explained with a smirk grin that since he had already done time for the same types of charges from another case before, he believed he couldn't be prosecuted again. This is not how double jeopardy works, folks. He's in prison for 20 years now. If he'd taken legal counsel, he could easily cut a deal for 5. Story 11. Not a lawyer, but I am a trades union representative. At the last company I worked at, we had a great team overall. My colleague was the head rep for the union while I was still learning the ropes. We had an electrician who had worked there for over 25 years. He was respected, but his views were sometimes inappropriate or out of touch. My colleague had just helped him return to work after a lengthy suspension due to a prior incident involving unprofessional conduct. He had kissed a staff member on the cheek. After a 6-month investigation, he was reinstated with a final written warning. One more issue, and he'd be dismissed with all benefits lost. Just 2 days after returning, we were called into another meeting about him. Senior HR and company leadership were present. They shared a new report. Apparently, while working at a residence, he had entered the home where only a teenage girl was present and had a highly inappropriate conversation. We asked to pause the meeting so we could speak with him privately and offer advice. But before we could, he admitted to the behavior outright and tried to justify it with comments that were completely unacceptable and deeply concerning. He was suspended again and requested our help, insisting he had done nothing wrong. We reviewed the case materials and quickly saw there was nothing defensible. He had completely undermined himself. He ended up losing his job, his pension, and even his home. Due to the nature of the incident, no employer wanted to take the risk of hiring him again. Story 12. She lived on a large riverfront block. She had a jetty for a boat. Her large tree fell over in a storm and landed mostly in the water, making it difficult to moor her boat. She wanted to sue the government for not removing her fallen tree. Story 13. Some of my colleagues have regretted taking cases with difficult clients. Typically, those clients would keep sabotaging their own case by doing reckless or irrational things during litigation, but it seems like you're looking for a lawyer who has some sort of moral aversion to the crime the client committed. Up front, when you take the case, you know what you're getting into. So most lawyers with any objections would decline to take it from the start, as opposed to regretting it later on. Story 14. I read a patent and told my bosses it was both invalid and not infringed by anyone. It had 10 means for elements in each claim that no one would practice or that weren't supported in the description. Partners new to patent litigation sued anyway using young, inexperienced attorneys. 3 years and millions in billing later, every defendant won claims were either not infringed or invalid. Then we appealed. Another round of billing with another young attorney who didn't understand the core issues. The patent was so weak that no one ever offered to settle. I quit over this and similar reasons. The firm eventually collapsed. Story 15. It's like a 100-way tie for first place. Spoiler alert. They had the illegal substances on them. Less frequently, it was a firearm. And yeah, let's just say though, I have a permit. Defense for the latter was not something we had to worry about round those parts. You'd be surprised how quickly cases become at least theoretically defensible as soon as you establish any distance whatsoever between the client and the contraband. In fact, I'd say there's a systematic bias in juries and lots of inconsistency in the relevant case law about how difficult it is and or ought to be to prove possession beyond a reasonable doubt. It errs, of course, in favor of the prosecution. Comment. 1. I'm a lawyer, not your fairy godmother. I probably won't find a loophole or technicality for you, so don't be surprised. I didn't assault your girlfriend. Take that car, rob that liquor store, sell that powder, or do anything with that. 13-year-old. By the time we meet, much of your fate has been sealed, so don't be too surprised by your limited options and that I'm the one telling you about them. If you are being chased by the cops and you have something illegal in your pocket, dump it. These officers are not geniuses. They're out of shape and want to go home. They will not scour the woods or streets for your couple grams, but they will check your pockets. 2 grams is not worth 6 months in jail. That's not what I meant. Not a defense. All the money is gone now. Not a defense. They deserved it. Not a defense. But that substance was so diluted. I barely noticed anything. Not a defense. She didn't look 13. Possibly a defense. It depends. She didn't look 6. Never a defense. That's a line that should never be crossed. Story 16. I had a client who won just shy of a 7-figure settlement in a personal injury case. She then dropped into my office to ask me to file a fee dispute against the attorney who represented her in that case. That attorney took a little over to 6-0. If you're doing the math, that's a 27% fee on a case where 40% fees are common, and he did an excellent job because the woman got nearly $1 million, and she still tried to sue him to recover some of his fee. I declined the case immediately. She then filed an ethics complaint against me for discrimination. Story 17. Not a lawyer, but I was a witness to an assault a few years back. Had to get up on the stand and be questioned. Terrifying. It happened on a night out, hanging around outside a club. A female friend of mine took offense when some guy grabbed her from behind. They started yelling at each other until the guy suddenly struck her in the face. All this happened in front of 3 police officers who witnessed it and arrested him on the spot. He denied everything despite it happening right in front of law enforcement, so it still had to go to court. Comment. 1. How would you even argue on his behalf? There's a misconception that attorneys only work to prove guilt or innocence. In many cases, their main job is mitigating the offense. If officers saw your client assault someone, you're probably not going to argue for a not guilty verdict, but you might work to get a lesser charge or alternative sentencing. That's a crucial part of being a defense attorney. Story 18. Worked in family law in California for like 2 years before deciding I'd change career paths immediately if I wanted to preserve my sanity. In CA, the obligation to pay spousal support Alimony ends when the recipient begins cohabitation with a new romantic partner. A man who was paying a very high monthly amount came into the office and wanted me to argue that his ex was cohabiting with herself. You see, he believed she was a narcissist, and since she loved herself and lived alone, that should legally count as cohabitation. He wanted me to argue that her living with herself meant he should stop paying alimony. He was nearly begging me to take the case. I declined. Story 19. A man once came to me wanting to sue someone for the wrongful death of his brother, but he couldn't keep his story straight. He said that his brother had been strangled while fishing, so I asked if the police had caught the attacker. Then he said there was no attacker, and that's why he wanted to file a wrongful death suit. I asked who he was suing. He said he wanted to sue the jeweler who made a ring. What ring? The one that made him strangle his brother. I politely declined and contacted the police as soon as he left my office. They apparently chased him into the mountains, but never found him. Story 20. Not a lawyer, but my husband sat on a jury in a case regarding someone allegedly accepting payment for physical companionship. The police had hidden in a wardrobe to gather evidence. They may have witnessed the interaction, but not the actual payment, since the couple went downstairs afterward. Because of this, there was reasonable doubt, and the jury ultimately found the defendant not guilty. Story 21. Not a lawyer, but I am the son of a man who got sued over a car accident. My dad was exiting our driveway when another driver struck his vehicle, swerved, and crashed into a palm tree. His car was totaled. The driver then sued my dad, claiming that the impact from my dad made him lose control. Naturally, when the trial happened, witnesses spoke. Witness 1. The guy was driving recklessly and nearly hit my girlfriend. After he crashed into the tree, I was about to confront him, but my dad stopped me. Witness 2. I just saw him speeding, crash into my dad's car, then slam into the tree. Witness 3 didn't say much, just that the car was wrapped around the tree. There was also video footage showing the driver clipped my dad during a blind turn. The other side's witnesses didn't show up. Case was dismissed. Edit. Spelling mistake that made it sound like our house became excited. Story 22. I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful life case that was pretty miserable. A woman gave birth to a baby with severe congenital conditions and sued every health professional she had seen during her pregnancy, claiming that if someone had told her about the condition, she would have chosen to end the pregnancy. Reviewing the records showed she hadn't sought consistent prenatal care. Early in her pregnancy, she went to a local for a pregnancy test, then returned a month later with abdominal pain. An ultrasound was done to check for distress, but not a full exam. The doctor was focused on the pain, not a detailed scan. Later, she was arrested for financial fraud and saw a physician in jail, but didn't tell them she was pregnant. That physician did no scan either. She sued all the involved facilities anyway. It was a very sad case, but the hospital won. Story 23. Not me, but my dad's lawyer. My dad's ex-wife decided the divorce wasn't moving fast enough, so she made a move while my dad was at work and we were all at school. She locked my younger brother in my room, the only room untouched, then called over 40 people to help her take anything she believed was hers, including furniture, old music, and even photos from before she was in the picture. I got home to find the house almost empty. I'm not sure what she thought would happen. She even took personal items clearly belonging to my dad, like photos of just us, and a computer he bought through his job. He sued her 3 times and won every time. Years later, she was caught in a financial scandal involving a summer camp and our former scout troop. Funny enough, my dad remarried a district attorney. They're now divorcing too, but on much better terms. Story 24. I read a comment in a similar thread, and they said that when a lawyer knows their client clearly did what they're accused of, the lawyer isn't there to pretend the person is innocent. They're there to make sure the client is treated fairly and their rights aren't overlooked. It's about ensuring fair trial. Story 25. I'm a paralegal. A local man in his 20s decided to rob his dealer, but went to the wrong apartment. When the college girl opened the door, he panicked and seriously injured her. She lay there for hours, just out of reach of her phone, while her mother kept calling. She survived after a neighbor found her, but is now paralyzed and severely disfigured. It's a small town. During the trial, the jury saw how under the influence he was, and how he bragged afterward to friends. He got over 40 years. The person who drove him to the apartment also received prison time. Story 26. A man in his 60s hadn't paid child support for decades, owing more than $60,000 for two adult children. He had been living in a remote area and working for cash. To avoid garnishment, then he received an inheritance. The money was deposited into his account and immediately seized by family maintenance. He wanted it back. Story 27. I got sued for $50,000 by a man who claimed his arm was broken when he sideswiped my car and we both received dues. And he was also cited for driving the wrong way on the freeway. My attorney discovered that the man had gone to the doctor the day before the accident and had already received treatment for the same arm injury. He was charged with filing a false police report and some related offences, and ended up serving 90 days in county jail. I paid my fine, completed the necessary steps to get my licence reinstated, and learned my lesson. Story 28. Luckily, I was on the other side of one of these ridiculous cases. I live in an area where liquor licenses are extremely valuable. They can be transferred between individuals, which is often easier than convincing the local authorities to issue a new one for a new restaurant or bar. My client was opening a new restaurant and found someone who had a liquor license but wasn't using it. I believe his bar had previously closed. He agreed to sell the license for about $250,000. The contract included a small notice clause, something like, you have to send notice of whatever in 7 days. My client's former lawyer messed up and sent it in 10 days. The seller had already received full payment but decided that because of this delay, he was entitled to keep both the money and the license. There's a legal concept called material breach of contract, which basically means that only significant breaches that impact the core agreement allow for serious remedies. For example, if my client hadn't paid, that would be material. But sending a document 3 days late after full payment, that's a technical breach. But no court in the US would call it material and certainly not let the seller keep both the license and the cash. So sued him. He represented himself. He made a decent showing for a non-lawyer, but the judge ruled against him. My client got the license, and the seller kept the money, which wasn't ideal, but better than losing both. Story 29. Like a breach of condition in English law. And the breach of notice was a breach of warranty. In any case, I don't see how he could keep the money considering the complete failure of consideration and the fact that he didn't suffer any loss. If anything, he wouldn't be entitled to cancel the contract, only to affirm it and potentially claim nominal damages. At least I think I'm right. Sorry. Story 30. In law school doing legal aid. My client was charged with uttering threats. He told his ex-girlfriend something like, I'm going to put you 6 feet underground, while holding a large knife. His defense? He admitted to saying it, but argued that it wasn't a threat, he just wanted to scare her into thinking he was serious. He explained that he was angry at the time and wanted her gone. He thought this somehow cleared him of the charge. Edit to add, it was common to have clients who, in the process of explaining how they were innocent, would describe doing exactly what they were charged with. Like, I didn't assault that kid. I just punched him because he wasn't showing me respect. Story 31. A guy wanted me to sue the city because they took too long to shut down his neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. He claimed the neighbor's house had mice because of a parked garbage truck, and that those mice were now in his house, reducing its value and making it hard to sell. I asked how long he'd been trying to sell his house. He said he wasn't actually trying yet. I asked what he had done about the mice. He said he called the city, but they refused to help. I then asked when he reported the illegal garbage business. He said he never did. The city just towed the truck after his neighbor got arrested for something unrelated, a DUI. Finally, I asked how he knew all this. He told me that he and the neighbor had actually been partners in the illegal garbage business, and that the neighbor's partner had told him everything after the arrest. Story 32. An independent mortgage broker from a small East Coast town one day just disappeared without informing his clients. Months later, one of his former clients found major errors in her mortgage paperwork, which led to costly legal issues with the bank. She wanted to recover damages, but the broker was nowhere to be found. His office was closed for non-payment. His home was up for sale, and nobody had any idea where he had gone. The only sign of him was his Facebook, where he was swimming with dolphins somewhere warm with his teenage daughter, which understandably enraged the plaintiff. Fortunately, he had prepaid his insurance and it was still active, so our firm represented him through the insurer when I finally reached him after about 2 months. He explained that he had lost all interest in the profession the year before. He had kept taking clients and processing files without doing any real due diligence or following proper procedures. His work was so poor we had almost nothing usable for his defense. He admitted he didn't care, declared bankruptcy, signed over his home, and got a short-term visa to join his daughter in Australia. We settled the case quickly since he had no intention of returning, and realistically, we were never going to get paid. It was a very sad case, but the hospital one